My name is Santos. Welcome to the Preservation Week event hosted by the Historic Lexington Foundation. On the screen behind me are just a few of the buildings that HLF has rescued since the 1960s, often due to the work crews of volunteers who literally cleared them of debris and pigeon droppings to make them saleable. In most cases, we purchase the threatened building. Later, we can resell it to responsible owners with a legal agreement to preserve it. And these are just some of the iconic buildings of the city. Today, it seems unimaginable that they could have fallen into ruin or been razed. But all of them were at some point threatened with neglect or even demolition. And there are also properties that we have donated to the city or other foundations to operate for public use. Our main presenter, or our first presenter today, is Cinder Stanton. You probably all met her at one point or another. Formerly a senior historian at Monticello, and she's an expert in researching the history of African American families in our region. And then Deborah Woodcock and I, who are both homeowners of historically African American properties, we'll be commenting on our personal experiences of these. Now, here's Cinder Stanton.
Okay, how's it sounding up back there?
Okay.
Louder.
Is it on?
I don't know.
If you follow it,
Thank you all for coming. Make it louder.
Oh, now right. We did do this several times today, so that was the practice one. Try to do better next time.
Cinder, that's a little too loud.
Oh, he's doing it back there. Wow, okay, well, I want to thank the Historic Lexington Foundation for asking me to participate in this. Margaret Sandal and Tom Santos. It's been so much fun to work together. It's the whole aspects of it, everything were music to my ears. Local history, local knowledge, collaboration, collaborative research, making connections, all of these things. And connections is kind of a theme for our talk today, and that's not supposed to be there yet. Anyway, we came together because of history. We all wanted to know more about where we live, and we found that there was a thread of African American history in all three sites where we live, both in slavery and in freedom. And all three sites are connected by Woods Creek. It ties it all together. So right now, we are on part of what was a 600-acre plantation, which has been called Sunnyside for 150 years. And I'll call it Sunnyside no matter what year I'm talking about it, because it's just easier that way. None of us Kendal residents would be here today except for the great generosity of Isabel and Frederick Bartenstein, who gave 84 acres of Sunnyside Farm to the Kendal retirement community in 1997. And they were proud of their family's role in preserving the property intact over the years. And Mr. Bartenstein said that they had helped to preserve one of the largest remaining parcels of the ancient Borden Grant. In 1747, John Moore bought a 500-acre parcel from the Borden Grant. It was owned afterwards by 7 different families, 2 of them for a century, and all of its owners until 1865 were slave owners. With up to as many as 30 enslaved people here at any one time. I've been researching those enslaved people for several years, working with other residents in the Sunnyside History Task Group, and a book on Sunnyside's history is still pending, I'm afraid. That is the best word for it. But in the meantime, we did produce a historic marker, and it highlights the property's history, and in the left panel, it has the names of everyone who ever lived here, enslaved and free, as far as we knew. And this is actual installation day. This is the only photo I have with both the historic marker and Sunnyside House, and these are the installers from Broken in Charlottesville. On that day last June, was it last year? It could have been 3 years ago. I've lost the whole track of time. The left panel that I mentioned has the names of over 80 enslaved people that have been recovered from trips to the courthouse, to the W&L Special Collections Library, and mostly staring at a screen on the internet, which has an astonishing amount of information with a click, just a click away. There are almost no surviving private papers from Sunnyside before the 20th century. So we've had to rely on all kinds of public records. Censuses, tax records, marriage, birth, and death records, and especially wills and inventories. I've been especially interested in the 1828 to 1848 period, when it was, when the resident owners were Alexander T. Barclay and his wife Mary Paxton Barclay. In 2 years, I sort of expanded the research and looked at the records of Hugh Barclay, who was Barclay's grandfather. And Hugh Barclay came down with a stream of Scots-Irish settlers who came up the Shenandoah Valley early on. And he stopped about 1770 and settled adjacent to Thomas Jefferson's Natural Bridge property, and built that house, and that's the Red Mill. He established a mill. I think that's not only partially the original building, but the house is one of the oldest still standing in the county, so I hear. And it was probably where Alexander T. Barclay was born. I think it's also probably on the property somewhere where the man we're going to talk about now was born. This is Hugh Barclay's will, in which he gave freedom to my Negro man James, who I have found trusty and faithful in some good measure. And he gave James 4 years to pay for his freedom, to pay 50 pounds or $166 to become a free man. In 1806, James was the 4th person to register in the surviving Rockridge County Register of Free Negroes, and it provided his surname, which is Bolin, and his height, but not much else, and you can't really see that much. But in any case, this was James Bolin that Hugh Barclay had emancipated for a sum. There were extensive Barclay estate records as well, and they revealed that in freedom, James Bolin worked as a miller. I think he probably learned his trade at the Red Mill, and he was also a cooper, so he could make the flour barrels that were needed at the mill. 9 years after he became free, he had assembled enough funds to purchase the freedom of his wife, Hannah, for $400. Now, James Bolin really caught my attention. I said, I mean, this is a remarkable person. And so I asked my history buddies, Larry Spurgeon and Lori Wood if they had ever found any information about a free man named James Boland. And Larry shared some bits and pieces that he had pulled together, and Lori said that he had also caught her attention because she had read a social media post by HLF, Historic Lexington Foundation, which was about the installation of a plaque on a house in McLaughlin Street that was said to have been built in 1849 by a free black named James Boland. So, talk about connections. When I wrote back to them, I said, I just love collaborative research. It really is amazing. So I emailed HLF, Margaret wrote me back, put me in touch with Tom, and I think I'll let him carry on from here. I will.
Technology. Thank you, Cinder. When my wife and I came to Lexington in 1999, we spent 3 years trying to buy a house here. There just were very few available in town, so we weren't looking for an old house, certainly not a historic house, just something affordable and decent. And we didn't realize it at the time, but what made this house, the James Boland house on McLaughlin Street, affordable was just the fact that it was built by a former slave in 1849. That is, by someone who couldn't buy a house or create a house into an established residential area, but only on the fringes. So in 1843, he bought this acre of land on the turnpike that we now call McLaughlin Street and Lime Kiln Road. So this is Nelson Street, McLaughlin Street, and then it goes over to Lime Kiln Road and up the Sunnyside. So this arrow shows that the acre is here. And at the time, you can see the backyards of Jackson Avenue extended all the way down to McLaughlin Street. So this house really was just right at the edge of town. This is the Lexington water pipe bringing water into the town. When the railroad came in, somewhat later, this area became then sort of an industrial, it's literally the rail's end, full of coal and lumber yards. So what you see now, that what's called Rail's End, was the farmer's co-op for a while. It actually precedes the train station. I'm not a historian, so if I make any errors, like, please, I see Eric Wilson back there, so let me know. So the passenger rail station of 1883, and then this was the yellow house, which was kind of a distinctive house which housed the railroad crews. Turned this area into a busy, it was called Railroad Square. And the hardware store that's still here, that's kind of with metal siding that you see on McLaughlin Street. It's one of the remaining structures. The yellow house, unfortunately, was demolished in 2024. And then you see this pedestrian bridge, which you've probably seen images of before, and then this is sort of a grand hotel at the top of the hill, which was burned later. So this is how it looked even in the 1960s. Boland's house, which is right here, right off the picture, was really the only residence in the sort of no man's land of freight trains coming in, coal yards, a very busy and very noisy place. And then the train depot where students were still arriving, the trains backing in and ending here until, what year, 1960? Who's going to tell me? Who doesn't know?
9? 69, maybe?
No.
69.
Yes. So, yeah. Until it flooded, and then there was a push to remove the rail line and convert the university converted to another fuel, and that was the end of the rail. So all these businesses were then sort of left high and dry because they all depended on the freight. And so that's McLaughlin Street in the 1960s, heading down toward Lime Kiln Road. You see the hardware store is still there. The owner is a woman named Ann Schleissner, is a mother of a WNL student and is thinking about what to do with it. The train station, which has now been moved across the street, that was one of my projects with Washington and Lee 20 years ago. And then you see this is the Bolin House right down the hill a bit. So by the 1990s, the Washington and Lee campus had expanded over much of that old railroad square. The Coca-Cola bottling plant became Gaines Residence Hall. The industrial buildings gave way to the Lenfest Center, and the train station was being used as storage for theater props. The Bolin House, this is about how it looked in the 1990s, was divided into 2 apartments and was occupied by 5 Washington and Lee students. So when we bought the house, it didn't have any history attached to it, but Pam Simpson was a Washington Lee art history professor. She was devoted to studying the architecture of everyday life, that is vernacular architecture. Instead of having her students study Palladian villas, she trained them to research the ordinary looking houses that they lived in or passed every day. And one of her students, Megan Davis, was among the student renters of the Bolin House, and she wrote a paper about it. So when she went to the courthouse, she read through the old deeds, she talked to former residents, she studied the architecture and worked with her professor. And then she discovered that a man named James Bolin had purchased this acre of land in 1843, that he built this substantial house in 1849, and that he then gave the house to a man named William Kincaid in 1856 in return for a promise of lifetime care, room and board, and settlement of his debts, kind of an early precursor of Kendal. that he wanted to be secure for the rest of his life. Megan was unable to solve one mystery, though. While James Bolin was listed as colored in the tax records for the house, she thought it very unlikely that he was a black man. After all, there were only 364 free black people in the entire county in 1849, and they weren't buying land and building 2-story brick houses for themselves. So she speculated that he could have been a member of the Paladin tribe, since they were also listed sometimes as colored or free Negroes. So nothing about the house other than that a man named James Bolin had built it. We applied to the Historic Lexington Foundation, as you can, for one of their historic markers. Had it mounted on the front wall in October of 2024, and Margaret Sandell, who's our director of HLF, took a photo and posted it on her Instagram feed. And so that is how Cinder Stanton became aware that the free slave she was researching had built and owned a house that was still in use 175 years later. And coincidentally, Megan Davis, the student, 25 years later, saw that Instagram post as well, and contacted HLF and said, I used to live in that house. And then she came into town and looked at it, and I said, we knew about it because of this paper, and she had not remembered at all that she wrote that paper. I wrote this. But it had been so important in making that connection, all that research that she did. But even at first, though, Cinder still had some doubts, because there was nothing but the name linking her James Bolin to the James Bolin who built the house. But remember, 25 years ago, Megan, the student, had discovered this 1856 agreement between Bolin and Kincaid, giving up his house in return for the lifetime care. That's the terms of it. With that crucial piece of information, Cinder was able to complete the match, because she now had the death record for Bolin that referenced both his wife name, Hannah, that she knew, and Kincaid's name that connected him to my house. So a known fact about her Bolin and a known fact about our Bolin were finally connected through this kind of serendipity. And as Cinder said, Bolin had hired his wife, Hannah, from her owner for several years, as he was struggling to find the $400 that his owner wanted for her purchase. And I could be wrong, because last week I saw an excellent display at the Rockbridge Historical Society, which talked about slavery and understanding better how it worked, because I think most of us don't. But my understanding is that while she was on hire, any children from the marriage would have been the property of the slave owner. Is that correct? So, in a sense, when he purchased her, he didn't free her. She had to remain his slave, his property, because had he freed her, Virginia law after 1806 required that she leave the state. So in order to keep the family together, he had to keep her as a slave, which meant that her children and became his slaves, and her grandchildren became his slaves. I think that's correct. So when you hear about black people owning slaves, I always thought that seemed odd, but I think maybe some of it is just that keeping families together. So in this document, Bowen is granting freedom to his daughter Elvira and to his grandchildren, as she had married and wanted to leave Virginia permanently. He improved the impossible by owning land and building a substantial brick house, but I think his real life's work was really building a family, which was perhaps even more challenging in those conditions. He was born to a slave mother around 1780. He died in 1860, a freedman at age 85. Maybe ironically, just at the beginning of that rebellion that would have freed the family, whose freedom he made it his life's work to achieve. I just wish that we knew more about him as a person and had a photo of him. Cinder, are we going to find a photo of him someday?
That's what I'm about to say. Nothing yet, I'm afraid. No, we don't yet have a photograph or image of James Bowen, but we do have one of his son-in-law. This is Joseph Cooper of the Coopers of Irish Creek, we think. At the age of 91 in Marysville, Ohio. And he was the husband of Bowen's daughter, I like to say Elvira. You can say Elvira, I'll say Elvira. And they were living in the Bowen house, in Bowen's house, in the census of 1850. And a few years later, the whole family left for Ohio. And Cooper and his father were both shoemakers. And in this season, they would be over at White Sulphur Springs, making shoes and boots for the guests. So Cooper claimed that he made boots for 3 presidents, and Stonewall Jackson and Winfield Scott. He also said he directed the dances at the huge ballroom there at the resort. A big change of topic now. Wasn't that exciting? All those things that happened. In my search for the names of enslaved people here at Sunnyside, a major source was the inventory and appraisal of A.T. Barclay's estate in 1848. And there are 29 people in this list, which I know you can't see, sorry. But there was only one 2-parent family. The other adults had what have been called abroad marriages, where the husband and wife lived on different farm or plantations and were held in slavery by different persons. And what I've learned about Rockbridge County leads me to believe that a majority of enslaved men in the county did not live with their wives and children. The properties were smaller than huge plantations where it would be easier to find someone who is not related to you to marry. This is another part of the inventory showing 4 men in their 30s with no wives in the estate. This is Isaac, Eli, Davy, and Lee, and some or all of them were married, presumably, with wives and children, but they were somewhere else. One of them was Jacob Boyer, who was the Sunnyside blacksmith. And he had to travel all the way to the Fancy Hill area to see his wife, Sarah, and their children. Because on Saturdays after work, these men whose families were elsewhere would get on the road and be able to spend all day Sunday with their families. Jacob Boyer's parents also had an abroad marriage. His mother lived here at Sunnyside. His father, Humphrey Boyer, lived practically next door, fortunately, at Thornhill, the larger plantation of Thornhill. And all of this, thinking about the abroad marriages and the families that were separated by slavery, makes me try to imagine the paths between and among the different properties in this area, the pathways that united husband and wife at nights and on weekends. And they would link the larger plantations like Sunnyside and Thornhill, but also smaller properties on both sides of Woods Creek in this area. It's a little hard to tell, but that's Brushy Hill in the background. I don't have a good photograph of it, but both Thornhill and Sunnyside included land on Brushy Hill. And it was probably the site of religious meetings, because enslaved people had to meet as a group in secret because of the increasingly stringent laws that prohibited assembling in numbers or in groups. So their religious gatherings took place in the cover of forest or darkness. I don't have a story of this from Rockridge, maybe there is one, but there's a good one from Albemarle County, where one man remembered, quote, slipping out at night to go to a meeting on the wooded slopes of Monticello Mountain, where the county patrollers didn't usually go. And if they did come, he said, the worshipers would just run down the mountainside along paths that the patrollers didn't know anything about. When freedom came in 1865, families were reunited, and husbands and wives who had been separated by slavery could now live together. And one nearby site was a haven for newly freed families. It brought together people who had been enslaved at both Sunnyside and Thornhill, and it came about because of someone who did what no other white landowner in Rockridge County did, as far as I know, but somebody may know differently. A few white landowners sold a small piece of their land to individual freedmen. This man, the owner of Sunnyside, Eli Tutwiler, he did that. He sold a 3-acre plot to one man, and he gave 10 acres to his formerly enslaved overseer, Perry McCrory. But this man, William H. Ruffner, what he did was to sell a whole village of lots with a school in the middle of it. He was about to become Virginia's superintendent of public education in the new system of public schools, and he believed strongly in public education for both blacks and whites, but not integrated. They were to be separate schools. Ruffner had bought about 200 acres of Thornhill, and in 1869 he began to sell lots of an acre or less to freedmen, to 8 men in this first period. Eric Wilson of Rockridge Historical Society put me in touch with Deborah Woodcock because I've been working on community formation after the Civil War in Albemarle County. And Deborah actually lived on the site of a freedman's village, which was called Ruffner's Town at first, and then Liverpool, and now we know it as mainly as Newtown. And if you can see this map, this shows the relative positions of what we've been talking about. The red circle is Sunnyside, the green circle is Thornhill, and between them is Newtown, and then a little to the right is, I could even do that, is the Bolin House, which is between Sunnyside and Lexington. The Sunnyside boundary actually went right up to Limekiln Road at that time. Oh, but I should tell you that this is 1863 map, and the maps in that day, north is not where you expect it to be. And I have torticollis from looking at 19th century Rockbridge maps. So Deborah, you can really give us a personal perspective on Newtown. Oh, that's advanced, and this is the one.
I guess I have to turn this on, don't I? How's this?
Hello?
It was on.
Can you hear?
Okay, thank you. So this brings us to Ali's and my part of the story. We were looking for a house, and we found a property. It was out Ross Road, just west of town. It was just past Boxerwood, if you know that area. It was in walking distance of Kendal. So it was a nice property. There was a house on a small lot, and there was a lot next door. And there was a stream and 2 springs on this lot. So we were able to buy the house, and we were able to buy the lot. And that's when things started to get interesting. We had a friend who worked in a law office, and he did the title search for us, and he came up with something very complicated when he started to look into this, because there were a lot of very small, it seemed to be one lot, right? But there had been a lot of very small lots, just a fraction of an acre. So this is the chart he made of all these lots. So he had a lot more to bargain for, but he was a person who liked local history, and he got caught up in this, and he did a great job for us getting all this information together. So what you can see is, these are all the small lots. It's the opposite of what you usually think. Usually you have bigger lots that get subdivided, right? This is the opposite. There were all these small lots, and at the very bottom, these were some of the original land transfers from William Henry Ruffner to these people who became part of the Newtown community, and who increasingly they know something about, which is really fascinating. So what happened was, these lots were passed down or sold, and until about the 1990s. And then Norman Bowles bought up a lot of these properties and kind of consolidated them. So Norman Bowles, some of you may know if you're Lexington people, he had been, his family was part of this Newtown community, going back, I think, several generations at least. And he got educated in Washington, D.C., what do I want to say? At Howard University. And he got a degree in pharmacology, came back to Lexington, and he was the owner of Lexington Prescription in the early days when it was still in town, before it got bought and moved to its present location. So he did very well, and he started to buy up all these properties and consolidate them. And I guess they had been, some of these people were family, and he managed to just put these things together. So So that's what happened in the 1990s. Then he had the idea, he was very interested in sort of making the new town, what was the new town area, into kind of a fancy place, you know, with big houses and so on. And he lived he was our neighbor, he lived in a big house right next door to us. So he sold the lot and his house to Peter Sills, who some of you may also know from his historical renovation work in town. And he renovated the house that we live in, and he also had the idea he would build a house on this other lot. But we came along, and we bought the little house, and we also got the lot at that time. So, so that's the story of how we came into the picture. But we realized right away that there was some very interesting history here. You know, that there had been a community of people, that they had lived here for many, many generations, and that our property really encompassed quite a bit of this community. So the next thing that happened was in our experience of learning about Rockbridge history was that we were in the archives at Washington and Lee, and we were looking for information about the springs, these two springs that are on our property. And we didn't really find anything, they're not very big springs. But the archivist pulled out this map. This is an 1891 map of Ruffner's farm, Tribrook Farm. And the farm extended from, at the bottom of the map, do I have a pointer?
Center.
Oh, yeah. So Woods Creek is right here. So the farm encompassed was on both sides of Woods Creek, and then it extended west toward Brushy Hill. And here at this part of the map is where, if you can see all those little plots, that's where he sold parcels of land to these formerly enslaved people. And that was, on this map it's indicated as Newtown. In 1891 it was indicated as Newtown. It's really a wonderful map. It has a lot of little buildings on it. You can see the stone house, which I think is the Johnson houses on here. Ruffner's farmhouse was down here, and then all the Newtown plots, and there's some little buildings, and there's some names of people who were living there, and there's a schoolhouse indicated. So it's really quite a fine map. This is the spring that was so important. This community was centered around this spring, and this was their main source of water. And some of the deeds have some complicated language about who has water rights and how the cattle are supposed to be kept out of the spring and so on, which is kind of interesting. And these are some of the artifacts that we pulled out of the stream bank just below the spring. So we think there's potential if we can interest the archaeologists in doing some more excavations and maybe finding out a little bit more on that basis. My last slide, I guess. So this is the Ruffner farmhouse. And I don't think we have a date on this picture, but if you can see, there are black folks like lounging around in front of this building. So we think it would be like probably early 20th century when the community was late 19th century, when Ruffner was still around, and there was sort of a community of people coming and going between his property and Newtown, doing various things. So I guess I would say that then the next thing that happened to us really, in terms of this adventure of learning history, was that we started to learn more about African American history in the county, in Lexington. You know, the story of Buffalo Creek and Brownsburg and Glasgow and Sunnyside, and learning how important our little property really was in this broader historical context. And this is all knowledge that we have thanks to the very amazing work of the local historians who've really been very dedicated to unearthing all this information, and we're very grateful to them.
I'm gonna abbreviate what I was gonna talk, oh, sorry. I never learn.
How's this? Oh dear. But the school, if you could see the map, the plot, there was a little plot for a school. The Newtown School lasted until 1921. So then the children in that area went into town after that. I just wanted to say a couple things about the community of Newtown generally. I don't think I have time to do the individual portraits that I wanted to do. How did we manage that? Did it in. But all the founders, and there were 8 men who bought the original lots, were acted on their new rights after 1865, and they were 8 of the 1,000 freedmen in Rockbridge County who voted for the first time in their lives in the election of 1867 to accept a new constitutional convention and to elect delegates to it. And all the residents of Newtown voted in that election. Let's see. I can maybe dash through that. Shall I go ahead? One of them was from Thornhill and one from Sunnyside that I'm going to talk about. Telford Green and his wife Nancy were held in slavery at Thornhill. And in 1863, whoops. That's not good. Don't ever invite me back here, please. Thank you. In 1863, he and other enslaved men in Rockbridge County were conscripted for work by the Confederate government to work on the fortifications around Richmond, and that's Telford in this list belonging to John Rockenroll, who was then at Thornhill. Conditions were pretty dreadful down there. 21 of the men died that winter at the fortifications. But he became free in 65. In 1867, as I said, he voted. And in the turbulent summer of 1868, that was a summer of midnight rides and mob violence and rumors of the KKK, he went to court, the Freedmen's Court, to make a claim for unpaid wages for working in the harvest for a local farmer. And that same summer, he with 288 other local freedmen signed a petition asking for the protection of, quote, our lives and liberties by the presence of the United States troops. They said their lives were often in danger at night from attacks of students and others. In 1869, Telford Green bought a lot in Newtown, and that included one of the springs that Deborah showed us. And in that year, he was the only Newtown resident to have taxable personal property. Telford Green had a milk cow. Newly freed people, of course, came out of slavery with nothing. And it was years before more than a handful of freedmen appear in the tax records as owning taxable property, owning a horse or a cow or hogs. Nothing for years for most of them. But the first residents of Newtown, and of course land, that was almost impossible to acquire. But the original first residents of Newtown were able to expand their village, not in dimensions, but by dividing their small lots into even smaller lots. And that way, friends and extended family could afford to buy little 1/8 acre pieces of that. And over 10 years, the population expanded from 8 households to 15 households, there were 50 people in the community. in 1880. And last, Thomas Hamilton had been enslaved at Sunnyside, and he was working there in Freedom in 1868 when he too lodged a complaint with the Freedmen's Bureau against Eli Totweiler, the owner of Sunnyside, and his manager. He, quote, complains of bad treatment by the whites and an assault threatened him by Mr. Bear with an axe. 6 months later, he paid William Ruffner $50 for an acre lot in Newtown. And alas, he died very early at the age of 40, so his wife and children apparently were not able to continue an independent life at Newtown, and they moved back to Sunnyside and were the main domestic servants in the household of the next owner, John DeHart Ross. Their descendants today own 50 acres adjacent to Sunnyside, which Thomas and Nancy Hamilton's grandson purchased in 1921. And the Hamiltons of Brushy Hill were notable. They appear in the paper all the time as garden experts, and they won lots of premiums at the county fairs, especially for their pedigreed hogs. Anyway, on that note, I'm going to pass it back to Tom. And Tom, why don't you run through the Sunnyside pictures? Pictures as you talk about what, yeah.
We're just going to, Cinder has provided some photos of Sunnyside taken, what year?
2005.
So that was right, yes, right where we are today, 2005. I just want to make a short word of thanks to all of you for attending, and tribute to Kendal, Lexington for letting us use this room, and especially to Vic Crane for making this technology work. Thank you so much. It's Sunday afternoon. Kendal is going to need this room at 3 o'clock for scheduled services, but we can take a few questions, and then you're welcome to go over to Sunnyside House, is open the first floor, and continue the conversation with our presenters. I hope you all think about supporting HLF. I think our work is not over. In the past year or two, we've seen, unfortunately, a number of beautiful 19th century buildings demolished, and there are more demolitions planned for the coming year. I'm not going to name names, but see. We understand the need for change and growth in the community, of course, but always with an understanding how we can incorporate the work of past generations into our own lives. So with that, I'm going to see, are there any questions? And here is, I think, a kind of chronology of the owners of Sunnyside, where we are today. Yes?
Just one question. I'm curious. The fellow that built your house, he bought his wife for $800.
$400.
$400. She became his slave. Why couldn't he emancipate her?
Well, he could, if he had emancipated her. He was freed in 1806. After that year, any slave who was emancipated would have to leave Virginia within a year. So, in other words, all his wife, his children, his grandchildren, all in turn became his slaves, and that was under his protection, essentially. So again, when you see maybe a black man owning slaves, it's quite a different thing from what you may think.
I have a question. Is this Newtown settlement, can you see it from the road?
Can you see?
And if you can, which road would you go down?
No, you can't really see it. We would like to get at least a little sign on the road. We would like to have at least a little sign on the road saying Newtown.
Head up to your mouth.
Hold close to your mouth. Turn it down. This is why we need to do. Hold close to your mouth.
Okay. So we would like to have at least a little marker on the road, and maybe, and certainly it merits a really historical marker.
But she wants to know what road.
If you're familiar with Rice Road?
Yeah.
Okay, if you go past Boxerwood and you go over the crest of the hill, and you go down a little ways, there you will be crossing a stream. And that's the area where the settlement was. You know, the two springs feed into that stream, which is Moore's Creek.
Left or right of the road?
Yes, on the right side. But probably the community was larger than that. I mean, it probably extended on both sides of the road, I would imagine.
I think it might have
Yeah.
tipped over.
It's
And then-
before Union Run.
Oh yeah. It's the, I would say, sort of the lower flanks of Brushy Hill.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's a couple hundred feet higher than Kendal, you know, just a little bit higher in elevation over there.
Thank you.
What happened to Newtown?
What happens? Repeat the question.
What happened to Newtown? Well, I mean, I guess it was a staging area for people, and they went off from there. Maybe they went north, or they, you know, had opportunities as time went on. There are some people who are still part of that community who still have land and are still living there. Some of the buildings, you know, they were just very modest buildings that fell down, and one burned notably, and there's some foundations. There's some foundations.
Migrated out of the area, and then the buildings sort of went into disarray.
Yeah, I don't know how long it's been since any of those buildings were standing. Probably a while.
I wonder if anyone in here remembers seeing more than the two houses that are there now, seeing the buildings or hearing about them.
The oldest house is 1920.
Eric,
In the spirit of connections, you talk about pathways and people. One other trill on that, you mentioned the 1867 election. The candidate that goes to serve and represent Rockbridge County is the future Judge McLaughlin. So the street that Tom and Barbara live on,
oh, never would have picked that connection.
that all but a few of the black men who voted in that voted for the other candidate. They tipped Rockbridge, but the region went conservative to McLaughlin.
Yeah, they voted in a block for the convention, the constitutional convention, but the delegates they voted for lost.
The man that owned the prize-winning hogs, is he just up in Field Road on the left?
Price-winning hog, Commander owned the price-winning hog.
Hamilton, where,
Because there was a black family that used to raise hogs just past here.
just up,
Going up.
up Enfield Road. Yeah, they're all connected. They're connected to the Hamiltons have a larger piece, more up into Brushy Hills. But they all have some family connection.
I believe that's Berkeley Hamilton's family you're talking about.
Pardon?
I believe that's Berkeley Hamilton's family that y'all are talking about.
Yes.
I knew him. We knew him when I was growing up.
I can't hear.
I knew him.
I want to hear.
I knew Berkeley Hamilton, and I believe that that's the family y'all are talking about.
Exactly. Eldridge Hamilton, I think was his father or grandfather. He's the one who bought the land.
His grandson still lives in his house on Brushy Hill. We call it Brushy Hill.
Okay, I want to talk to you about that. Yes, the Hamiltons. And I know, Arthur, you're still here, you have Hamilton stories, but you're probably not going to tell them.
Let's take one quick question.
What?
I was going to ask the same question, if Newtown could be accessed from Enfield Road as well. So did it sort of lie between Ross and Enfield?
No, that's too far.
Okay, so the
That's too far.
Hamilton's property was just...
Yeah, Sunnyside, the whole extent of Sunnyside is in between.
I remember seeing him, maybe as late as the 1970s, with a wagon with mules going up Enfield Road.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Another Berkeley Hamilton story, I lived in Mackey's Tavern when I was a child, and Berkeley used to bring his hay equipment over and do our fields. He'd not plow, we cut out the hay on our fields. We had to get someone to come in and bale it. But he'd take his mules and come over and all the time when I was growing up living in the tavern, Berkeley's horses would be feeding down the road. He would let them out on his fields, and they just sort of use the side of the roads as communal fields. We all loved Berkeley.
Cinder, is that a photograph of the Ruffner House? Is that house still standing?
Oh,
That was
no, I don't know where it came from.
It was on the house was on the golf course, and I think it was, which is now the tribe, they call it the tribal golf course, so it was, I think, a clubhouse or something in the golf course, and they demolished it later.
Yeah, it's gone.
The last couple of slides that you just jumped over, what were those buildings at the very end? Just what,
Farm buildings here at Sunnyside. Here, right
It's the dairy buildings. I mean, you saw the picture of the dairy, when it was working, that was showed before. And so some of you must have been here when they were standing and can tell us when they were taken away. It's still a mystery, but they were here in 2005, so 5 years into the life of Kendal at Lexington.
I know we have to leave this room, but I would love to see those images in
Yes.
some way.
We can make the whole presentation available, or put some of it on our website. And again, anyone, if you want to come, kind of drift over to the Sunnyside House and continue some conversations.
Are they on your computer and I
Yes.
can see them?
You just come up when we're done.
That's just a fraction of them.
I know.
Yeah.
And you have a lot.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you all.